I know I did the little walk from the No CLT app where it has the old pictures of Brooklyn if you stand in certain places. And I was walking through what used to be Brooklyn. The majority of the buildings I saw were government buildings. And
Mm,
that really drove my thesis because yeah, the arguments they gave were okay, we need to get rid of this blighted land and raise tax values. And I'm sitting here thinking, did a jail and a government center raise tax values more
right.
than residential areas? Because I mean, I don't know personally, but I can't imagine a government building is paying a bunch of taxes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think of the irony in that, in the sense of um, a jail is built, and now this jail is majority African American,
right.
um, African American population. So here, you know, education was interfered with, to put
Mhm.
it lightly, according to Pamela Grundy. She talks about the social capital of a Black neighborhood.
Right.
That's now destroyed. And what you do now is build a jail, which, as we sit in 2021, going into 2022, is predominantly filled with Black people.
Yeah,
So that's very, very interesting that you made that connection. And but as it pertains to your study, what would be the one thing you would say that stood out to you the most in your project?
uh, one of the city councilmen, John Thrower, he was absolutely outspoken, blatant racist. And I found multiple quotes where he talked about how African Americans stink because they can't bathe correctly, and how Reginald Hawkins, one of the leaders in Brooklyn, about how disgusting of a man he was. There was just like and this was in 2002 that this interview was in. So this man still believed this stuff. Like he didn't, that didn't go anywhere. And in my
Mm,
mind, that's telling me, okay, he sat on the city council in 1960 with these racist thoughts.
mm,
Like you can't deny that racism drove that urban renewal project. And I
mm,
listened to Stan Brookshire talk, and he tries to portray himself as a progressive, moderate mayor, but he did nothing to save this. He was proud, literally, he was proud of destroying the community.
yeah,
And
that's very interesting.
he was proud of it. And as I
Well,
started,
what makes you think that he was proud? I have some ideas, but I just want to hear how you articulate those.
well, there's this one quote. It's in the Levine Museum. Actually, he says, "I get a real kick out of driving through that area today, thinking back on what it used to be."
Mm,
And I'm just like thinking back on the cohesive community that it used to be.
mm,
Like,
mm,
what are you talking about? And
mm,
that was one of the things that I really thought that made it proud, that made him proud of it. And he spoke on it all the time about how positive of a move urban renewal was for the community. We need to take these federal dollars and we need to make use of them. And the best way to do that is to get rid of this slum, disease
yeah.
filled, disgusting community. Like,
And it's very what's very interesting, Maverick, is that this the federal dollars that they said they needed,
right.
HUD ultimately doubled back and threatened to withhold and take money back because the promises that they made, um, they did not even keep,
Right.
which was to build more affordable housing. So then they built Earl Village, and
Okay.
then they came and they destroyed Earl Village. So it's very interesting when you think of almost the hypocrisy and the inconsistency of racism. And so there's all these justifications that are mentioned, but if you do a little bit of homework, you begin to realize like even the newspaper photo of the Jersey Journal that has the person um, driving the bulldozer, and that may have been the mayor. I'm not sure.
That's Brookshire.
Yeah, Brookshire.
Yeah.
He's driving the bulldozer. He has his suit on. I mean, they use this as a photo op. And a lot of the people caught wind of what was taking place
Right.
at the last minute. And many of them, I mean, no one from the community attended the city council meeting.
Yeah.
There was no
No voice.
there was no voice. And so, and that was very, very interesting, and those things that you bring up. And so it's fascinating that that you, out of the things that really capture you, is, now you mentioned the businesses.
Right.
What else did you discover about some of the Black businesses and the failure to recover after that? When you think of Charlotte today,
Right.
being last in upward mobility, however, you have a few areas that are, the home values are a million plus. Ballantyne, Myers Park, all these areas. Do you think that interfering with Black business ultimately crippled the Black economy in Charlotte? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. In my conclusion, I speak on the lack of generational wealth. And that's a topic that I've been reading more about and trying to familiar myself more with. But just so think, if that was what, 50, 60 years ago, if these businesses could have continued to grow,
yes,
and the families continued to make capital,
yes,
then they would have capital to pass on to their children.
yes,
But that wasn't the case. They
yes,
lost their businesses, they lost their homes, they were forced back into a position of poverty and with no chance to get out. That was the problem, is that not only did they get pushed out of their businesses and their homes and their community, but they got thrown back into another impoverished community with
right,
no hopes of getting their businesses back, no hopes of being able to own a home again.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
the generational wealth factor is the thing that I think is most substantial when you look at the economic divide, not only in Charlotte but throughout America. I mean, it's insane, and the economic divide and the segregation that still remains. I mean,
yes,
so
yeah,
Charlotte
yeah.
is complete. Anyone who says Charlotte is not segregated is either ignorant or just blind. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
no, it's almost a willful ignorance. You know,
right, right,
there's
right.
this, you know, it's like
Oh no, no.
yeah,
Charlotte's a
we're not
good place.
segregated, you know, yeah,
Yeah,
and it's almost, and I get kind of, because I hear the term, you know, a new Southern city,
right.
and that is, to me, you know, one of the things that I've noticed in my travels and doing organizing in different cities is, one of the things that the power and the elite like to do is they like to sort of rename something in the hope that you know, the tragedies of the past can be sort of whitewashed over. Yeah, so a new Southern city. However, this new Southern city has within it this dark history.
Yes, yeah,
This
exactly.
dark history, and it's a dark history that has not been addressed and resolved. Now, think of what is your thoughts on the trauma, the historic trauma, and just, I have some thoughts on that, but you know, since you're fresh out of this study,
Right.
yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Happened 60 years ago. What type of trauma do you think that it caused the Black community? Did you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have a little story I want to tell along with that.
Yeah.
It's from a Native American woman, and she spoke about the historical trauma that Native Americans still have to this day. And she was speaking of some massacre, and she said, my whole family, like my great grandmothers, great great grandmothers, when they speak of this massacre, they automatically break down. And this
Mm,
was over 100 years ago. And still
mm,
to this day, if you mention it to the tribes that were affected, it immediately becomes emotion. They become emotional. And it's a memory that even though they weren't there, it's a memory that they have. And I think it's the same way in Brooklyn, because like I said, Brooklyn was so fundamental to the African American community in
It
Charlotte.
was. It was.
Every family in Charlotte told their children, we used to have this place, the Lincoln
Yes.
Theater, the Savoy
Yes.
Theater, the
Yes.
library,
Yes.
the
Yes.
Queen City Classic. We have
Yes.
all these things, and they are
Yes.
no more. And
Yes.
so, not as those people pass away, that's fine, because I know that they passed along their memories of what Brooklyn used to be, and because of that, I think it still remains a trauma to the people who were
It is.
affected.
It is.
So
It
if you
is.
look at it that way, maybe, okay, not a lot of the residents remain. That doesn't matter, because their
doesn't matter.
residents remain, their offspring, their grandchildren, and those are the people who are still being affected by what happened to Brooklyn. And
Yes.
so you can't deny that there's a historical trauma. And that's why I wanted to argue for ethnocide. And I think as I go forward with
So
this project,
explain that more to those of us who may not understand. I have a little gist of it.
right.
But explain to me a little bit more about ethnocide.
So ethnocide was coined by the man who created the term genocide after the Holocaust, Raphael Lemkin. And this was in the 1940s. And he pretty much created ethnocide because he wanted a way to express that a person's or a people's culture could be destroyed without destroying the people.
Mm.
And that's exactly what I saw happen in Brooklyn. I mean, the culture was, I don't know, I'm sure parts of it may remain in a small fraction.
I don't think, I think, like you said, I mean, it
It's gone.
remains in such a small, minuscule,
Right.
that you can't even really count it as having
No.
an impact. But go ahead.
Not versus what it used to be.
Not what it used to be.
Yeah.
Not what, because like you say, I talk to people who are in their 80s, and
Mhm.
some are older than that. I remember I was at Bethel A&E not too long ago, and there was a gentleman there. He was in his 90s, and when he knew that there was going to be a meeting about Brooklyn, he made sure that his family got him there, and he talked about it. Still, you know, because think about this. One thing that people don't realize is Brooklyn was a land that nobody wanted,
Right. Yep.
because it was a flood zone.
Yep. That creek. I can't
The
remember
creek,
the name.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a flood zone, right. You're pretty smart. And so a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
And so because it was a flood zone, some of the shotgun houses that were built on stilts and those kinds of things, but they didn't want that land. And so after Reconstruction and during Reconstruction, it was kind of given to them,
Right.
sort of as this land that nobody wanted. Like, here, you guys can settle down here. And it really ties in nicely to the history of African Americans in this country, which is we take what's
left,
left over, right? So whatever out of the pig that the
right.
you know, the master didn't want, you know, he would throw it in a slop bucket, and we would take it and make chitlins and make all these different things out of it. And that's what happened in Brooklyn. They took something that was not wanted, discarded. They made something out of it. It had a black Wall Street. And it was sort of like this flower that grew from the concrete, because it was something and that's the pride, because it was like, this was something that we built.
Yeah.
And they were wealthy people in Brooklyn. There were great homes in Brooklyn, educated professionals in Brooklyn. And this was something that Blacks did not want. This was something, you know, that you talk about, you know, the former president of the NAACP, what was his name? You mentioned his name earlier, of the, his son now was a state rep. Not Chambers, Alexander. Kelly Alexander. Kelly Alexander.
Yeah.
He was a president of the NAACP.
Okay. I did not know
He was a president of the NAACP.
He was the first Black city councilman in Charlotte.
Yes. And he started from being the NAACP of Mecklenburg County, then he became the state NAACP.
Okay.
My history is correct. He took and made a bunch of handwritten notes about the homes that were destroyed.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw those in his papers. Yes,
Yeah.
dude. There's the folder's like this thick.
Yes.
It's
yes.
just like little pieces of paper.
Yes. That's how important it was for him to make sure that this wasn't erased.
Right.
And he brought Martin Luther King Jr. was scheduled to come here in, I believe, 1957. And Dr. King was stabbed. And so he didn't come. He sent Ralph Abernathy in his place. So this idea that, African Americans went along with it is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So this was something that was taken. And to this day, those who are in power, those who are the wealthy, they have an opportunity to acknowledge what has taken place. But there's kind of been a refusal to really address this in a healthy way, which I think is very, very interesting. And if you had an opportunity to make a case before the wealthy and the elite, and have you heard the term Charlotte Way?
Charlotte Way, I think I have. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, there's a that's a term that's been coined. That there's a Charlotte way of doing things, like So ultimately, there's these efforts of justice, and there's these efforts that, on the surface, it looks like they're doing something,
right?
But ultimately, those efforts fall victim to the Charlotte way. Mm-hmm. What would your argument be for restorative justice? Because the reason why we came up, think about that, but the reason why we came up with restorative justice is because people push back on reparations. Mm-hmm. And so I coined the term here, restorative justice, as it pertains to a social construct, because I thought people would be able to handle that better. And still,
right.
They have not handled that. There's been I've been a part of conversations where local officials have said, we'll do this, but don't use the term restorative justice. Almost as if it's absurd to think that an injustice has taken place here and there needs to be some restorative measures. What's your thought about that?
One thing I'm thinking about right now is I'm thinking of some of the arguments they're going to give, and it's that, okay, well, the residents of Brooklyn let their homes deteriorate, and I can see it now. I can see people saying that now, because they said it back in this. That was one of the reasons why they thought they should destroy the community. So I remember in Tom Hanchin's book, actually, he has this little part in there about how it was John G. Hood and William Henry Belk. They came together and did a project where they bought like 50 lots in Brooklyn, and they put 50 homes on it, and they bought those 50 lots for, I think, $13,000. And then he versus a home in the white suburbs was, one home in the white suburbs was $4,000. You have 50 homes for the price of, what would that be? 3 or 4 homes in the white suburbs.
Yeah.
And not only did they throw up these shotgun houses, which wouldn't have been a problem if the landlords would have maintained them. And I recall in numerous of the interviews that are in the UNCC archives, the landlords did nothing. I mean,
they did nothing.
Yeah, as the times progressed, as electricity progressed and plumbing progressed, the homes were giving none of that, and most of these homes didn't have an indoor bathroom. And I recall Kelly Alexander Jr. talking. He said the Brooklyn community was blighted in areas, but it wasn't a ghetto and it wasn't a slum in the worst connotation of the words.
Exactly.
Yeah, he said
Exactly.
there were houses that needed work, but that's all they needed. They needed work. If they would have came in and done what urban renewal was meant to do, renew and rehabilitate instead of clear, Brooklyn would still be there. Homes was okay. Yeah, there might have been a couple homes we needed to clear, but not every single home, not the library, not the school, not
Right.
like you were talking about the beautiful homes that existed and there
Yeah.
was no reason those homes needed to go. And I think that's something that you could try to ploy to these people is that really the residents of Brooklyn were the victims. And
Mm.
I know that's something that people want to overlook is they don't want to call them they want to place blame on people who were wronged. And that's just something that I think can easily be argued against in the Brooklyn case because like you said, they were given no voice to what happened to their community. They watched it get destroyed. They enacted eminent domain and kicked people out of their homes. Even homes that people owned, they were like, sorry, we have this right from the government and you have to move. We're going to give
And
you
they were made promises that they would be allowed to come back, and they were
yes.
not.
And there were some people that waited so long because they did it in like 5 zones. And so there were people that were like in the 5th zone just waiting, literally just waiting for their homes to come to get swept away from this project because they watched the entire other community get destroyed. So
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not a great answer to your question, but I would definitely have to think about that more because I can only imagine the blowback that you get because the wealthy people in this country, they don't want to look back and see the evils that America has done. And that's something
Mm.
that I was not introduced to in my education when I was
Wow.
younger. The evils, America's great. We're great. We created equality and created capitalism, but we don't want to tell anybody that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so and once I got into college, I took a 7-year break and I laid brick for 7 years. So I got my hands dirty and I went back to school and I got in close with one of the professors at UNCC, Dr. John Cox, and he really got me interested in genocidal studies. And that's when I started learning about the evils of America. I started learning about the indigenous genocide, how
Yeah.
we murdered, I mean, millions
Yeah.
of American Indians. And then as I started looking at other cases of genocide, I started thinking of how American slavery can be considered a genocide. And if not a genocide, because, okay, I will admit, slave masters didn't want to kill their slaves because they were property. I mean, they were useful to them. But if not a genocide, that's when I came interested in the concept of ethnocide. Okay, if these people didn't get, erased from the world, they did lose a lot of their culture. And especially in Brooklyn, the culture is gone. There is no culture of Brooklyn anymore. Like there's 3 buildings left, right?
Right.
And
And
a black
I think they're owned by whites. I don't think they're owned. They're not owned by African Americans.
even the church
Yeah.
did not know that.
That's owned by the Brooklyn Collective. Jason Wolf, who's a great guy, by the way. But he's not black, but he's a great guy.
But that was like one of the churches. And that was one of the things that really took me about Brooklyn is how important religion and the churches were.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
churches fuse that community together. And
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, well, they're saying that this community was, slum, crime, disease filled. And every resident from Brooklyn is saying how okay, well, we went to church 3 days a week and we worshiped and
Right.
we looked out for each other's children. And,
Mhm.
if there was a problem, there multiple people said we never closed our doors. We slept on the front porch when it was hot.
Yeah.
We weren't worried about crime. Like, yeah, of course, there was somebody that would do something stupid every once in a while. Don't
Mm.
white people? Like, I just don't understand. And that was one of the things that really took me as I got deeper into my research. I just kept learning about how strong the culture was in Brooklyn. And the more I did that, the more I found how ridiculous and how hypocritical the white elites of Charlotte were. And that's how I structured my paper is I showed how ignorant and blind Charlotte's white elites were, and then I portray the strong, vibrant culture of Brooklyn. And at the end, I throw in, okay, we've come a little ways. Mayor Lyles has given an apology. That's a good first step. But now we need to fix this gap of generational wealth as I talk about. So
So let me ask you a question. Now that you've been sort of captured by this story, and I could tell the way you talk about it that it's had an impact on you, how do you think this is going to shape your life going forward and your career going forward?
that's a good question. I already plan to continue my research going into grad school. I'm graduating this spring. I hope to get into Chapel Hill, but if I don't, I'm going to stay at UNCC, and I'm going to continue my research. I want to keep talking to as many people as I can, because I think the more I listen to those interviews, the more I got, I guess, enthralled with oral history. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an amazing way to learn about the past. I mean, you can sit here and read all day, but you're reading one person's thoughts, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. When you talk to 2 or 3, 4, 5 people, okay, well then you have 2, 3, 4, 5 opinions, and you can start comparing and contrasting those opinions. And so back to Brooklyn, I want to keep working on this project through grad school, and I want to publish a book on this because, like you said, there are some books. Dr. Hanchett has a book, but it's really just a few chapters on Brooklyn and the African American community in Charlotte. So what I really want to focus on is I want to identify the culture of Brooklyn, because I feel like that's so important that needs to be put together in a monograph. I think people need to know about the churches and the schools and the fictive kinship, and they need to know about what Brooklyn really was.
Mm.
And within that, I'll also, bring up how Charlotte's white elites destroyed this community with no regard for social welfare. And then hopefully by then we've come some way with restorative justice. And then in my conclusion, I can have a nice little rap about how we've began to right the wrongs here in Charlotte, because that's really what I want to do. And as much as I want to say I just want to be a historian, like the more I learn about the injustices, like the more I want to find a way to like involve myself more than just putting pen to paper, because
Yeah.
at the end of the
We have a
day,
lot. We have a lot of academics now, but what we need is more.
outspoken.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we need people who are, there's a famous quote that I've heard recently. It talks about, how do you turn a moment into a movement?
Oh,
It takes sacrifice, and so often, we are hesitant to put our lifestyles in jeopardy.
right.
So we have all of this information, and we look to, further it through an academic way.
Mm-hmm.
However, who's going to make the sacrifice?
Right.
Who's going to organize the marches? Who's going to knock on doors? Who's going to help manage a campaign? Who's going to help fundraise? Those are the kinds of things that I'm hoping as we go forward, people like yourself are inspired to do. And the question I would ask you is, how do we get more young people to respond to this issue the way you have?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because you know the young people are all caught up in selfies and TikToks and
right.
and getting
So
liked and
when I went back to school, I thought I was going to be a high school teacher, and I started substitute teaching, and I realized that these kids don't care about mainly history. I mean, I talked to the kids I subbed all the time, and I asked them, how do you like your history class? And almost every single one of them, oh, history sucks, blah blah blah, all these dates. And I realized, okay, in high school I can't teach anything like, because in my mind I'm learning about genocides and human rights and stuff that matters. I don't want to teach about the American Revolution. I mean, in my mind, that's, the kids don't care. Like they don't care.
So
Got it. I would just I'd rather be able to grab people in a way, like in a college setting where you could focus more on what's happening in real world times and how to fix that. But as how to reach younger children, I really don't know. Because like you said, they're so focused on themselves and their selfies and their video games, and I don't know.
Well, listen,
yeah, I mean, I like to think of myself as unique. I mean, like I said, I'm only 28, and I've
but listen, that's a perfect age to make a difference, man.
Right,
and
right.
That's the perfect age. But let me ask you a question now. Why we thought you brought up about young people in school. How do you think this conversation and the conversation of critical race theory, how do you think those, because you know, how many is this being taught in Charlotte, in Mecklenburg? Are they teaching about how a Black community was destroyed? I mean, how do you, first answer that question, then I want to ask you something about, go ahead. What do you think about that?
I mean, I can't say for a fact, but I know when I was in school, we weren't taught about any injustices that happened in Charlotte. And a couple of things I can think that need to be taught about the Dorothy Counts story. I mean, that was a nationwide grabbing story. I mean, the whole nation knew about the Dorothy Counts trying to get into the school and getting spat on. I never learned about that in high school. The bombings, like you said, baby Birmingham, I never knew about that. In my research,
you mentioned Julius Chambers. His law was bombed.
I learned about it, you know, in my senior year of college. But
Fred Alexander, their homes were bombed, firebombed.
Reginald Hawkins too, I believe. There's three of them. Yeah. And then Mayor Brookshire had a community meeting at Ovens Auditorium to try to put a mop over that, and he tried to he tried to like bring the community together through Black homes getting bombed, and really, like, the Alexanders, they were like, I don't know what Mayor Brookshire is trying to do right now. Like, our homes just got bombed, obviously because we're outspoken activists. Like, unless he's gonna let us be activists, I don't know what he thinks is gonna help from doing this thing at Ovens Auditorium. But that was funny. I came across that after I finished my paper.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, also, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, because we mentioned a little bit about some of the indigenous people, Native Americans. You know, the history here, the Catawba Indians,
right,
and trade in Tryon. You know, that was a famous Indian trading post.
Yes.
In the center of So, and a lot of places like Myers Park and places in Mecklenburg County, that land was owned by the Catawba Indians.
Really?
So so the land was stolen,
right? And
then the labor. Do you realize the history of slavery in Mecklenburg County?
I know we had a good bit of slavery. Do we have Native American slavery as well?
No, slavery of Blacks.
Okay, yeah. I know we had a good bit because the Cherry neighborhood, I think, was mainly built. I think that was a little bit after slavery, but the Cherry neighborhood was built for ex-slaves to live there so they could come work in the Myers Park area.
Right.
And I had a good quote from Alfred Alexander. He said, my mom always told me that we were good enough to work in their homes, but not good enough to live beside them.
Right.
And that really struck me. I was like, that's a strong quote right there.
Strong quote. And you think of Myers Park and Greer Heights. Those two neighborhoods are also connected the same way. And Myers Park had a historical, it had a problem with restricted deeds.
Yeah.
So blacks couldn't buy, and a lot of the home associations, the deeds were restricted, so you couldn't sell the property to
no coloreds. Yeah. I found that was all over Charlotte. To be honest, that was all over Charlotte. I found an old deed from, I think it was like 1910, from a place off Carmel Road, and it had that the no sale of this land shall be proceeded to colored people, any one of the colored race. That's what it said. I was like,
so when you think of like the land being taken from the Catawba Indians, when you think of the labor that
built,
that was the wealth that began to accumulate because on slavery,
right?
Charlotte went, in terms of the Industrial Revolution and cotton and those things, the railroads being built by former slaves and those who were victims of the convict leasing system, and then redlining and restricted deeds. And then you have urban renewal. So you begin to see this pattern and this 100 years of, stolen wealth and, sort of this intentional roadblocks, So when we talk about Charlotte being last in opportunity, it's easier to get out of poverty in places like, the Mississippi, or it's easier to get out of poverty everywhere else than it is in Charlotte. Charlotte is the hardest place to get out of poverty, but who specifically are we talking about? Blacks.
Right.
Because we're definitely not talking about the whites that live in Myers Park and some of these other areas.
Right.
So when we talk about Charlotte being last in opportunity, we're talking about the Black economy as an economy that helps us to understand that the Black economy is really crippled and Blacks are living in abject poverty. And then we look at the school systems and we realize that by the time an African American starts the 3rd grade, he's already 3 years behind his white counterparts. I don't think people really get to see the big picture of the atrocities that have been committed here against African Americans. And it saddens me that we still have members of the wealthy and the elite who intentionally oppress. Okay. Ignore is good. Ignore is good, but I like oppress. Yeah. Oppress the moment becoming a movement. They don't want there to be a movement for justice. So there's just an intentional oppression of it, man. But it's been great. It's been great talking to you. And hopefully we could talk a little bit more about that. And I want to stay in touch, and I want you to really pray about being a part of restorative justice going forward. And maybe we can work together and partner on some other things that we have in the pipeline that's going forward. Because I like, your passion is refreshing, and to me, it's kind of confirms that I think RJCLT, we're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's reached nobody, it's reached me. I've read almost every post on the website, and I really enjoy that little video that's on there that the Charlotte Observer did. I think that
Yeah.
really is a nice little wrap up of what the project is about and what you're trying to do. But
Yes.
but yeah, absolutely. I'd love to stay in touch, and I'd love
Sure.
to figure out a way to be involved. Because like I said, it's one thing to put pen to paper, but it's another thing to walk the talk. And like you said, make the sacrifice. And
Yeah, yeah.
and
There's a lot of exploitation in the Black community.
yeah.
So we have this, we've been exploited. Blacks have been exploited in Charlotte. And I can say we because I have family that's been living down there for, 40 years. And my family is from, a rural area in North Carolina. So, there's been a lot of exploitation. Slavery, after slavery,
Yep.
Jim Crow, redlining, restricted deeds, all these things are forms of economic exploitation. But then it's almost like there's this academic community that doubles back and writes books on it, and it'd be more whites who are further exploiting it. However, there's really no justice.
Right.
And my thought to you is allow your passion to do more than be an academic. There's something that I don't know what your religious beliefs are, but you seem to have been called to this work,
Right.
and you should explore that and really take some time to meditate on that and ask God, how He would like you to go further and carry this message, and what would He like you to do. It's like, are you a Christian or are you Jewish or?
I'm a Christian.
You're a Christian, okay.
Southern Baptist. I hate it.
Southern Baptist, all right. Habakkuk asked the question, God, why did you cause my eyes to look upon this?
Right.
In other words, he's saying, there's so many people who are indifferent to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But why did you cause my eyes to look upon this?
Right.
And the idea is he's been called. That's why God allowed him to see it. So I'll end with that. And so we'll talk some more. Maybe you could, if you edit it, just, maybe that'll be, we'll edit it there. But it's been a pleasure talking to you.